It happened 600 feet beneath the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, where sunlight doesn't reach and silence carries more weight than words. The USS Delaware, a Virginia-class nuclear-powered attack submarine, was in the middle of a week-long stealth patrol. On board were 134 crew members, trained, tested, and tuned into every second of the mission. Every action had consequence. Every breath had purpose. And that's exactly where Seaman Jace Brooks made the mistake that almost cost him everything. "Brooks, why are you even looking at that screen?" the sonar technician hissed under his breath, but it was too late. Brooks had tapped a sequence that initiated a diagnostic ping, an unauthorized sonar burst, in the middle of a silent drill designed to avoid detection from a nearby foreign vessel. For a few terrifying seconds, everyone froze. The unmistakable blip echoed into the deep. Commander Sullivan's eyes slowly lifted from his mission log. "Stop all movement," he said calmly. The humming of systems ceased. Boots went still. Fingers hovered mid-air. Even the ever-churning heart of the submarine seemed to stall. "Let us know in the comments which branch of the military you admire most." Commander Sullivan had served over 18 years beneath the sea. With 2 decades of sonar drills, live combat scenarios, and nuclear payload training, he had earned the crew's silent but total respect. He wasn't just their captain. He was their anchor, their compass, and their last line of reason. At 46, his short silver hair and calm eyes masked a mind always in motion. He could feel the ship breathe. He could hear tension before it sparked. And now, he could sense that someone had broken the code of silence. "Sound control," Sullivan said. "Report." Chief Petty Officer Raines stepped forward, voice low but steady. "Unauthorized sonar pulse detected, 2.6 seconds long. No follow-up signal. No known contact return yet, sir." Sullivan turned slowly toward the sonar station, where Brooks sat stiff as steel. The rest of the sonar team had inched away without a word, leaving the rookie isolated in his guilt. Seaman Brooks was just 19, fresh out of basic, too confident, and about to learn the cost of recklessness aboard the deadliest machine on Earth. Tall, with a shock of blonde hair that he hadn't yet learned to flatten properly under his cap, Brooks had a habit of smirking in the face of authority. He called it charisma. Others called it stupidity. He thought he was clever, until today. Sullivan said nothing for several minutes. Instead, he turned to the communications officer. "Secure comms. Begin passive monitoring protocol. I want updates every 30 seconds. Then, without looking at Brooks, he walked to the central operations panel and took manual control. The silence stretched long enough for every crew member to feel the weight of the water pressing down on them. Then came the storm. "You tapped into a diagnostic sequence during a stealth operation," Sullivan said at last, voice still even, "and you did it, without clearance." Brooks opened his mouth, but one look from the XO was enough to clamp it shut. "Do you know what happens when a hostile vessel hears us before we hear them?" Sullivan asked. No reply. "They get the first move, and in underwater warfare, Seaman Brooks, the first move is the last one." Sullivan motioned to the navigation team. "Hold position, all systems passive. Let's see if our friend upstairs is listening." The crew moved with mechanical precision. Only Brooks remained frozen in his seat, unsure if breathing counted as another mistake. For the next 2 hours, the submarine remained dead silent. Tension coiled through the hull like an electric current. No one raised their voice. No one joked, and no one looked at Brooks. He had gone from rookie to liability in a matter of seconds. By the time the first sonar sweep came through, from the foreign vessel they'd been avoiding, it was too late to undo what had been done. A vague ping, direction unknown. Then another. Then silence. It was unclear if they had been detected. But that wasn't the point anymore. Commander Sullivan summoned his senior officers into the briefing room. The crew waited. The pressure built. When they emerged, Sullivan looked more composed than ever. "Resume silent drill," he ordered. "Seaman Brooks, report to engineering." There was no anger in his tone. That made it worse. As Brooks marched down the narrow corridor, he could feel eyes tracking him. Disappointment, frustration, maybe even fear. On a submarine, there's no outrunning your mistake. There's no open sky, no corner to disappear into. The walls remember. So do the people. Down in the engineering bay, Chief Engineer Reyes handed Brooks a manual. No words, just a thick binder of maintenance routines, all written in unforgiving black ink. "You're going to clean every intake filter in this sub," Reyes finally said, "and then every bilge pump, then every circuit board." Brooks swallowed. "Aye, Chief." Up on the control deck, Commander Sullivan remained silent, eyes locked on the sonar display. He didn't need to say more. His authority didn't come from volume. It came from precision, and from the trust he'd earned through decades of not failing his crew. Later that night, when the mess hall opened, Brooks sat alone. No one invited him to join their table. No one said a word. Even the cook handed him his tray with a slight nod and nothing more. It wasn't cruelty. It was protocol. The kind of discipline that kept 134 souls alive beneath 600 feet of pressure. And for Brooks, that silence spoke louder than any reprimand ever could. The hum of the submarine systems returned, soft and rhythmic like a heartbeat, but beneath that calm was a tension that refused to dissolve. For Seaman Jace Brooks, the days following his mistake felt longer than the entire 8-week basic training course. In the confined steel corridors of the USS Delaware, every glance, every silence, every withheld conversation was a reminder. He didn't belong yet. Not until he proved he could carry the weight of this vessel and its lives on his shoulders. Commander Sullivan hadn't spoken to him since the incident. That was worse than yelling. The commander's silence wasn't avoidance. It was a test of character. A test of whether the boy with too much confidence had anything deeper behind those wide, unsure eyes. Brooks scrubbed intake filters with a toothbrush-sized tool. He checked pump valves and rewired backup systems under the stern supervision of Chief Reyes. He didn't complain. He didn't try to explain himself. He worked. Still, the sonar ping incident hovered over the crew like a low-pressure system. An invisible weight everyone felt, but no one spoke of. On the third night, just after 0200 hours, an alert came through. "Sonar contact," one of the techs whispered. "Bearing 113 degrees. Possible trailing vessel." Commander Sullivan stepped onto the bridge within seconds, wearing a dark blue undershirt and tactical vest. Sleep didn't show on his face. "Report," he said. "Unknown contact. Approximately 2,000 yards. No response to passive ID. Trailing slowly. Minimal noise signature." Sullivan folded his arms, considering. "It's the same pattern," the XO murmured. "They've been shadowing us since the pulse." Sullivan nodded once. "Silent running. All non-essential systems to stand by. Let's vanish." Brooks, though no longer at sonar, overheard whispers. He knew they were talking about him, even if his name wasn't said. And he knew, deep in his gut, that if this turned into an encounter, the blood would be on his hands. Back in engineering, Chief Reyes barked, "Brooks, we're going into whisper mode. You know what that means?" He did. In whisper mode, every piece of equipment had to run at minimal noise. Even a poorly lubricated fan could compromise stealth. Brooks checked vent seals, cable brackets, pressure lines. His fingers worked faster than they ever had before. Up on the bridge, Sullivan sat quietly, his eyes scanning the sonar patterns. He didn't speak unless necessary, trusting his crew to execute without hand-holding. That was his style, empower through expectation. "You think they'll make a move?" the XO asked softly. Sullivan's eyes narrowed. "No, not yet. But they want us to know they're here, and they want us to wonder what they'll do if we make another mistake." Silence returned. For 6 more hours, the contact trailed them, a steel predator in the deep, waiting for a reason to strike. The Delaware kept pace, evasive and patient. Down below, in the mess hall during shift change, Brooks stood in line alone again. This time, however, Petty Officer Langston, a fire control technician, broke rank and nodded at him. "Tough start," Langston muttered. Brooks blinked. "Yeah, you're still here. That counts." It wasn't an invitation to sit or share a joke, but it was something. Later that night, while Brooks was polishing one of the hydraulic reservoirs, the sound of boots echoed behind him. He stood and turned, half expecting Chief Reyes or another chewing out. But it was Commander Sullivan. Brooks stiffened to attention. "At ease," Sullivan said. Brooks dropped his shoulders, unsure of what came next. "You know what it means to serve on a submarine, Brooks?" "Yes, sir." "No, you don't. Not yet." Sullivan leaned against a metal brace, his posture relaxed but his eyes razor-sharp. "You're not just learning procedures here. You're learning responsibility. Responsibility without excuses. Down here, no one cares if you're tired, if you're stressed, if you're misunderstood. If you make a mistake, the ocean doesn't care. It just takes you." Brooks stayed quiet. "When I was your age, my first deployment was on the USS Helena. I messed up too. Forgot to close a secondary coolant line during a drill. We almost lost the backup reactor circuit." Brooks looked up, surprised. "You did?" "I did," Sullivan said flatly. "I got 2 weeks of pipe cleaning and silent meals. But I learned, I adapted, and I never repeated it. You want to be in this crew? Then you take the hit, and you grow." Brooks nodded. "Aye, sir. I don't want your apology," Sullivan continued. "I want your focus, your attention, your loyalty to this vessel and to every man inside it." "You'll get it, sir." Sullivan stepped closer. "Good, because next time, if there is a next time, it won't be drills. It'll be torpedoes, and you won't get a second chance." With that, he walked off, leaving Brooks with more clarity than guilt. For the first time since boarding the Delaware, Brooks didn't just feel like a guest. He felt enlisted. 2 days later, the trailing vessel disappeared. Whether it lost interest or was recalled, no one could say. But the lesson had already been learned. A week later, during a routine maintenance check, a critical air filtration error occurred. Emergency teams scrambled. A pressure gauge in one of the lower intake ducts had failed, risking contamination of the breathing system. Brooks was the first to spot it. He had memorized every valve, every protocol, every decimal. He raised the alert in under 6 seconds. Systems were locked down, airflow rerouted, and contamination avoided entirely. When the situation resolved, Sullivan reviewed the log. "Who flagged it?" he asked. "Seaman Brooks, sir." Sullivan didn't smile, but he nodded once. That evening, Brooks was invited to sit with the sonar team during dinner. "Guess you're not just a pretty face anymore," one of them joked. Brooks grinned. "I'll take it." As the USS Delaware surfaced 2 weeks later, returning to base, the crew lined up for final checks. Commander Sullivan walked the corridor, glancing over his crew. His eyes paused on Brooks, then moved on. No words, just acknowledgement. And for a sailor who'd started by breaking protocol, that nod meant more than any medal. The surface felt surreal after 3 weeks submerged. As the USS Delaware slowly cut through the misty waters of the Atlantic, the sunlight bounced off the hull like a welcome that few on board could fully enjoy. Life on a submarine conditioned the crew to darkness, silence, and steel. The open air was foreign again, even if briefly comforting. But for Seaman Jace Brooks, stepping back into the light wasn't a reward. It was another chance. Commander Sullivan's debriefing was short, precise. Every crew member received a performance assessment, and most were congratulated for maintaining stealth under extreme conditions. Brooks received neither praise nor reprimand, just a sealed envelope with his updated duty rotation. Inside was a single line highlighted in yellow: Advanced Sonar Observation, Shadow Crew Evaluation, Provisional. He was stunned. A Shadow Crew evaluation was rarely given to first-year sailors. It meant Sullivan was watching, testing, measuring whether the rookie who'd once endangered the ship could ever be trusted with responsibility again. That night, while docked in Norfolk, most of the crew went their separate ways for shore leave. Laughter returned. Bars welcomed old stories. Phones lit up with family calls. But Brooks stayed on board, walking the quiet corridors of the submarine like a ghost retracing his steps. He found himself outside the sonar room. The low red lighting inside glowed like embers behind the reinforced window. One of the senior technicians, Mackey, spotted him and motioned with a chin nod. Brooks stepped inside, nervous but composed. "Didn't think you'd want more sonar after last time," Mackey muttered without looking away from the panel. "I want to learn," Brooks replied. Mackey didn't answer, but he slid over and tapped the screen. "Show me what this reflection pattern means." Brooks leaned in. "Double arc? Return echo? Likely whale migration signature?" Mackey cracked a slight smile. "Not bad." They stayed there 2 hours. No ranks, no tension. Just signals, patterns, and a shared respect for the deadly beauty of sound underwater. When the Delaware's next mission was assigned, another covert patrol, this time in the Mediterranean, Brooks was moved to Shadow Crew for sonar rotation. He wouldn't be making calls yet. He'd watch, learn, prove. The deployment was delicate. Intelligence suggested foreign naval activity near disputed waters. Tensions ran high. Sullivan made it clear, "We will not be provoked, but we will not be blind either." 3 days in, just off the coast of Crete, something unusual appeared on sonar. A pattern that didn't match standard vessel movement. Sporadic, low-frequency pulses that cut off mid-sequence. Brooks noticed them first. "Sir," he whispered to Mackey, "could this be interference from a deep-sea buoy relay?" Mackey frowned. "No relay signals here. Keep tracking." Brooks adjusted the gain, focused the sweep, and leaned in. "Sir, I think it's an unmanned underwater drone." Sullivan was summoned. As he stood over the sonar screen, he said nothing. He watched the shifting signals, the incomplete patterns, like a code half-written in the water. "Possible enemy UUV," Sullivan finally said. "Passive reconnaissance model. No warhead, but it's mapping us." "What's the call?" XO asked. Sullivan's voice was firm. "We disappear." The Delaware dipped below thermal layer, shifting speed irregularly to avoid pattern tracking. Lights were dimmed, systems minimized. The sub became a ghost in the sea. It worked, until it didn't. At 0300, a second UUV appeared. This one closer, faster. Mackey's fingers flew over the controls. "It's got active sonar, it's sweeping." Sullivan's gaze hardened. "Maintain silence! No engagement!" But then a soft alarm beeped. One of the backup ballast regulators on the lower deck had triggered. A mechanical fault. Not loud, but not silent either. It was enough. The second UUV changed trajectory. It began following. Inside sonar, the atmosphere grew colder than the water outside. Sullivan turned to Brooks. "You said you recognized its pulse pattern. You still believe it's a recon drone?" Brooks nodded. "Yes, sir, but it's newer. The pulse variation is tighter. I think it's tracking pressure differential, not just noise." "What would you suggest?" It was the first time Sullivan had publicly asked him for input. Brooks hesitated, then stepped forward. "Run an artificial decoy pulse using the backup vent systems. Trick it into thinking we surfaced 200 meters north." Sullivan stared at him. "Risky. If it's wrong, it pings us directly." Brooks swallowed. "Then I'll take the blame." Sullivan considered, then gave the nod. "Do it." Within 90 seconds, Brooks had rerouted vent cycles through engineering, simulating a subtle shift in ballast, mimicking the pressure displacement of a surfacing submarine. The drone shifted course. Everyone in the sonar room exhaled. Sullivan placed a hand briefly on Brooks's shoulder. "You just saved this boat," he said. Brooks didn't smile. He didn't speak. He just returned to his seat. 2 days later, the Delaware received an emergency transmission. A U.S. communications vessel, USS Huron, had gone dark near the Ionian Trench. Possible mechanical failure, possibly worse. Sullivan was ordered to investigate. The Delaware rerouted silently. Upon arrival, there was no surface signal, no distress beacon, nothing but the cold sea. The command team gathered in the ops room. "Could be a trap," XO said. "False signal to bait us." "Or they're still alive," Sullivan countered, "and waiting for help." Brooks reviewed passive sonar logs. "There's no signs of combat, but I'm picking up a consistent low-frequency signature, repeating every 48 seconds. Mackey leaned in. "Could be a hull knock. Emergency code." Sullivan nodded. "Helm, bring us in slowly. Minimum profile." As the Delaware approached, the shape of the Huron became visible on scopes, listing to one side, dark, lifeless. But then, a flicker. "Sir," Brooks whispered, "look at that current pattern. Something's moving near their stern, controlled." Sullivan narrowed his eyes. "Someone's alive." They sent a drone. It confirmed partial power failure, flooding in 2 compartments, but life support was active. 5 crew members had survived. Barely. A risky maneuver followed. The Delaware surfaced briefly to relay the location and status, then resubmerged. The crew was saved hours later by a surface support ship. As Sullivan closed the final report, he looked at Brooks across the briefing room. "No medals for sonar, no glory," he said. "But if we didn't hear what you heard, those men would be dead." Brooks nodded. "I was just doing my job, sir." "Exactly," Sullivan replied. "And that's what makes a sailor." The USS Delaware continued its silent patrol, gliding through the deep like a whisper no one could hear. The crew had settled into a rhythm again, but something was different now. Seaman Brooks no longer walked the halls with his eyes cast downward. He had earned his place, not by charm or confidence, but through humility and relentless effort. He had made a mistake, owned it, and grown from it. And now, the crew respected him not because he was perfect, but because he had proven he wouldn't break under pressure. The next mission was routine on paper. A patrol near the Azores, monitoring foreign sonar buoys and communication channels. But in submarine operations, routine never meant safe. On the second day, an unexpected seismic tremor rattled the ship. Small at first, a low rumble. The crew stiffened, knowing any anomaly in the deep could mean more than a shifting tectonic plate. Lieutenant Mackey narrowed his eyes at the sonar. "Sir, we've got something strange. Reflected pulses, almost like our own, bouncing back with a delay." "Glitch?" Sullivan asked. "Don't think so," Mackey replied. "Could be a natural cave system, or something else." Sullivan gave the order to slow speed and begin scanning the ocean floor. The Delaware moved with deliberate care, like a hunter avoiding its own trap. Brooks stood at the secondary sonar station, now a fully qualified assistant observer. He leaned toward Mackey. Could the delay be caused by an artificial structure? Mackey looked at him, then at the screen. "Maybe. You're thinking abandoned substation? Or something more active," Brooks said quietly. They followed the echoes, into a crevice nearly 500 feet below the expected seafloor map. Something was off. Man-made sonar reflectors, embedded into rock, cables, shadows that didn't move. "This isn't an accident," Sullivan muttered, scanning the monitor. "Somebody built this." Suddenly, the entire sonar display shifted. A burst of sound hit the Delaware. Direct sonar ping, not cloaked. They'd been detected. "Unknown contact approaching," a voice called. "Bearing 291, speed increasing." Sullivan didn't hesitate. Silent running. Dive to 750 feet. Evasive pattern delta. Brooks, stay locked on the signal. Brooks's hands flew across the controls. They're not following yet, sir, but they're tracking. The next 4 hours were a masterclass in submarine cat and mouse. The Delaware weaved through trenches, glided past rocky terrain, used every known tactic to break the trail. But the shadow followed, not aggressively, but persistently. A warning. By nightfall, the enemy contact had vanished. No pursuit, no engagement. Just a message. We see you. Sullivan gathered the crew for an informal address. A rare moment. This is the world we live in, he said, standing in the center corridor. A world where silence can speak louder than weapons. Where one ping can mean war, and one mistake can mean death. You've all held the line. I'm proud of every one of you. He paused, eyes sweeping the room. Especially those who've learned the hardest lessons, and stayed. His eyes met Brooks's. No more words needed. 3 days later, as the Delaware docked at Norfolk again, the crew was released for post-deployment leave. They spilled onto land in waves, smiles, relief, exhaustion, pride. Brooks walked with Mackey and a few others, his name no longer whispered but spoken freely in their stories. Inside Base Command, Sullivan filed his reports. One document he signed personally, Brooks's promotion recommendation. Petty Officer 3rd Class, Seaman Jace Brooks. Exceptional composure under pressure. Shows promise as future sonar lead. Recommend continued mentorship. Before Brooks left base, he received an envelope from the captain's office. Inside was a single note. Sonar isn't just sound. It's trust. You've earned it. CS. He folded it carefully and tucked it into his locker. That night, he walked to the harbor alone. The sky above was calm, and the water below reflected a stillness only sailors truly understood. He stood there, watching the last glimmer of the Delaware's hull as it rested in dock, and he thought about how close he had come to being sent home. How thin the line had been between redemption and disgrace. He didn't know what mission would come next, or where, but he knew he would be ready. Because once you've heard the silence of the deep and survived it, it never leaves you. On land, mistakes are lessons. Underwater, mistakes can be death sentences. Discipline in the Navy isn't optional, it's oxygen. What would you have done in Commander Sullivan's shoes? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you found this story compelling, subscribe to Authority Watch and hit the bell icon. More stories of real courage, silent sacrifice, and deep-sea lessons are on the way.